So, welcome, Ken. Thanks for joining me on this short little interview. You've already been on my podcast, the Blue Hour podcast. So, this is for specific for the Visionary Art Grant that you're going to be a jury of.
Yeah.
So, welcome.
Maybe to start, if you want to introduce yourself, what do you do? What's your medium? What's your approach?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ken. I'm a experimental theatre director and movement director, and yet to be film director, hopefully this year. So primarily my practice is revolved around working and relying heavily on imagery and iconoclasm and tableau as a form of theatre rather than sort of traditional narrative structures. So I'm more interested in how the image speaks than how the text speaks. Of course, I do write time to time, depending on what the text is, but of course, yeah, it just depends on what the project offers to me. But mainly it's a visually led process, and yeah, that's kind of it for me.
Yeah, and I remember from our previous conversations, you were basically born in this realm of theater, and your parents were in that realm, if I remember correctly, too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, more for my mother's side because she was a dancer. But yeah, definitely, even for my father's side with the sort of the music. But definitely, I've been immersed in that creative space for a very long time.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was remembering. To start, like the idea of this little interview conversation is to get to know, for people that gonna apply to this grant, know more about you, what you're looking for. But so let's start just by, if you want to just give a personal definition of visionary art and what draws you to this particular genre or approach in art in your own terms, because it's very subjective.
Yeah, I think for me, what defines a visionary artist, I guess for me, it's about what I call as honesty. Some people might refer it as authenticity, but I prefer to call it honesty. I feel like it's individuals who are really tapped into their vulnerability and listens to what their heart speaks rather than what others expect them to see and do, or what's I don't know, popular in the current contemporary setting. I appreciate work that do speak from the heart. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be absolutely dramatic or very emotive. I think there are definitely different ways of approaching that. It could be the most simplest thing. It could be the way how light is placed on a specific object. But I think, yeah, I don't know. It's a very tricky thing to sort of pinpoint. But I think as an observer, I think you'll instinctually know. But also as the creator, you'll know if there is something honest in the work or not. And I know that's a little bit vague, but I think we all know what we're talking about, if that makes sense. So I think that's what you know what I mean.
Yeah, visionary art, like that's why I'm trying to get like samples of all the juries to describe it in their own words, because it's a term that's been loosely used, but you can go as deep, like from my own research into the esoteric side, what is visionary art, like in a kind of metaphysical way, from activating your pineal gland and receiving visions to create, to all the way to like just not even have this open consciously, but just being a vessel by being authentic and true, and like you say, not influenced by external circumstances, which will naturally bring you to this same place in a way. In this sense, can you share a little bit more about your own artistic journey and your creative process in your work?
Yeah. So I started in the opera house as a kid. That's where I was first introduced to theatre or just any sort of performance practice as a whole. And from then on, it was just completely imprinted into me. It was just sort of burned into me of what performance is and what performance could be, especially working at such a level of how all the different sort of elements coming together in one space. It really left a mark on me. And then from then, I pursued quite a traditional route growing up. So I really focused on becoming a dancer, becoming a performer as a priority. But then things started to shift when I joined a production arts course during high school, essentially. It was a class that I had to take because I had to take a fourth subject in the UK. And it really opened my eyes to what performance could be from behind the scenes, looking at the lighting, the sound, the scenography. And that allowed me to focus towards more of a course at university where I wanted to direct, but I also wanted to design and I also wanted to perform. And then from then on, I started doing my own sort of research, looking into different practitioners across the world and just taking bit by bit from then. And then even then, during my master's at Central St. Martin's, that's when it really sort of flourished as a practice. And I started to find what my language was and how I wanted to translate that into a piece of work. And since then, I've been producing my own independent theatrical works. I believe I'm getting there. I'm not quite there yet in terms of what I want to translate, but I think I'm on the right track, and I'm really excited that I get to continue this journey and just see where it goes, man.
I remember you're very inspired by myth. Is there like different kind of tendencies you have before creating work, like different things you go to research in certain books or certain areas of life, or is there something that is significant about your process in that way?
Yes, I think whenever a project comes to me, it always either starts with a title or it could start with a conversation with someone. It could just be a keyword. And then from then, sort of subconsciously and consciously without realizing, I'm collecting all this material. I'll find myself watching very specific things or looking at a piece of color or a shade or a texture and just gathering those over time. And then suddenly, before I know it, it's become this sort of one symbiotic entity. And then from there, I'm able to sort of shape that into a theatrical performance. So yeah, generally it's just taking as much as I can, and then suddenly it sort of appears in front of me as like an entity, if you will.
Yeah, I love that. It feels this way in a lot of visionaries artists where the ideas can sometimes come from something within, sometimes from something you see and observe, and you just lay your attention on a daily basis on it, almost like a meditation, just on like the subject matter. And then all of a sudden your mind attracts the information subconsciously and consciously from everything you do in your life, meetings, conversations, books, and then you start to draw in the information needed for this kind of seed that you planted to blossom. In this way, next question is, in the ultimate way, what is the most profound impact you think visionary artists can have on individuals and the society? Like in its most optimistic way.
I think we definitely need more of optimism these days. But I think the impact that I think visionary artists have on people is that they allow for others to be seen in a very sort of spiritually but emotionally on very many layers of the human existence. I think you just know when you're touched by something so deeply. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to fully understand what you're being presented in front of you. It's that emotional reaction that you have where you feel comforted but also discomforted at the same time. The way someone's placed a mirror in front of you to look at your own reflection in a certain way. Yes, it is quite sort of provocative in a way, but I think it gives you that space to sort of be in touch with yourself. And I think that's quite beautiful when that happens. It doesn't matter the medium, it could be anything. And I think that's a beautiful way of witnessing that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It is true, like the way you put it in a simple way, but a very profound way. It's how, like, yeah, you confront your own shadows sometimes through an art piece. You're like something that is repressed or an emotion that has not had expression yet, finally get to get expressed and resolved within your psyche through art. And yeah, I think your work does play on that, just with the ideas you touch upon. And the myth you integrate that are very deeply wired in our subconscious minds. You pull this out of people. My next question would be, if you've noticed in the art world, in your particular field perhaps, the biggest challenges or exciting evolutions you've observed in the contemporary art world?
I think the biggest challenge is, I think I'll break it down in a few points. I think the first point is, I think we're all beginning to question now more than ever, what is our role in society? Because there's so much happening now, so many atrocities, there's so many inequalities and horrible things happening that we're beginning to sort of question, not in sort of like a cynical way, but I think there is a way of questioning, like, what are we doing this for? What more can I do as an artist? And of course, that comes from a place of reflecting on oneself, but also, I'd say, elements of doubt as well, which I think is absolutely normal in this circumstance. I think that's one of the challenges. I think another challenge, of course, finances. Of course, funding your project. If you've got enough money to sustain yourself, paying other people to take your time for your project, that's definitely a challenge. And especially in the UK, support is not as, I wouldn't say generous, but I think not as accessible as it used to be, which is quite sad. And also, I think another challenge, I think culture as well, because there's so much happening and the acceleration is happening so fast that it's hard to keep track of what's going on. Yes, that we have access to so much and there's so many artists that we can expose ourselves to online, but there's so much to be missed as well. And yeah, I don't know if it's the same with you. I find it sometimes quite overwhelming. With just so much being thrown at me all at once, so it's quite hard to cipher through to find that specific artist or a new discovery, if you will, because you have to keep scrolling and so on. But I think generally that can be sort of countered with going to different art events and so on. But I think generally, yeah, there's a lot going on digitally.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any trends like coming to the surface in the contemporary art scene? Like themes that seem to be emerging more than before?
I think definitely, stated, I think artists incorporating AI into their work, or in communication with AI. I'm still, like, for me, like, I have nothing against that. I think I think you have to acknowledge that it is a tool and that is it, nothing more than that. So there is like a fine line between using it as a tool, but also on the other side, using it as a product, which I find a little bit questionable. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there needs to be a balance between that, or completely eradicating the side of calling your artwork when you've got something else to do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, like I've had to reflect on that too a lot, and I've come to the conclusion that like AI it's very powerful because it mimics almost the subconscious mind, as in like it absorbs all your micro decisions. Even like if you're asking often the same question, it'll record and it'll kind of know more about your unconscious patterns than you. And in this way, I think it could, for artists, it's a good way to reflect on why you were talking about the why, like why are you doing what you're doing. At some point it has so much input on who you are and your work and everything that you can actually use it as a tool to reflect back at you and integrate your unconscious patterns and make your art more powerful in this way. But you're still the actor. This can, for me, it can become more as like your therapist. And in this way, you can learn so much more quickly and improve the depth of your work just by having this kind of mirror that is not objective, but it has kind of a sort of a very binary type of structure behind it.
Yeah, I think there's like it gives you sort of a logistical perspective taking all the data and just to be like, well, you're doing okay because so and so and so. But you know, I think there's good ways of using it, there's bad ways of using it, and I think people just need to have a bit more awareness, and I think definitely faith in themselves as well. I think that's something to contend with, especially in this era of just so much happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very fascinating time.
Mm-hmm. It does seem to influence everyone, artists specifically, just because we're drawn as a, it's our work to think and to kind of reflect on engaging work and everything. So we tend to, it's such a big topic in the history of humanity that of course it's going to permeate through our creative processes. Last question for this first part. Do you have an advice for any emerging artist, visionary specifically, like people that want to have this kind of whatever you described as being visionary?
I don't know if it's ever so slightly problematic, but I'd say don't be afraid to push it to the limit. I think one must have to go through breaking those boundaries that you may have or think this is where your limit is. I think it is a good thing to see how far you can push yourself and then come out from the outside and be like, okay, well, either I'm not doing that again, or okay, so I've done that now. Now where can I go? I think there's always, I think you always have to push yourself to some degree, and even if it means that you have to destroy something and then rebuild it, 5-10 times to find that you're satisfied with it, or at least that you feel that there is a sense of honesty and authenticity to it. Because I think when you create a work, yes, it's wonderful, but I think it's never a job done. Do you know what I mean? I feel like for me, I always look at it and think, yes, that was good. However, does it look good just because it looks good, or does it look good because there's something much more authentic behind creating that image and so on? So I think always challenge yourself, always argue against oneself time to time. But also don't be afraid to seek an outside eye. I always tend to find I always get non-theatre makers or non-performance makers to come into a rehearsal, for example, to observe what I'm creating, because for me, what I want to create is not just for a specific crowd of people who enjoy experimental performance. I wanted to make this as accessible, emotionally speaking, for the general people, essentially. So I always get someone else coming in. So I think that's another way of approaching, and I guess advice as well.
Yeah. Yeah, very valuable advice for sure. Do you have like a few visionary artists that inspire you and that embody the qualities of a visionary artist?
Wow. I'd say number one, the Italian theatre director, Romeo Castellucci. He's basically what started it for me, really, essentially. If we've got a bit of enough time, I can just go briefly into the sort of history with him. So I just saw his work years ago, second year of my university, flicking through slides of different European theatre directors. And I asked my tutor to stop at this one specifically, Romeo Castellucci. And then from then on, it was just the way he works with image, iconography, and creating new meaning, which is something that he's interested in. And I was just really deeply moved by that. I'd say another artist is the Greek choreographer Dimitris Papagiannou. The way he works with the body, but also creating tableaus, referring to the ancient history, referring to the mythology, I think that definitely aided my passion for imbuing mythology into my own work. And I would also say the Austro-French theatre maker, director, and choreographer Giselle Vienne. She's another one. She's
What's her name?
again, Giselle Vienne.
Okay, Joselle.
Giselle.
Okay.
Yeah, she's cool. I can send it to you later. Yeah, she's awesome. Yeah, she's another artist who works with time very, very carefully and very unapologetically. Like a lot of her performances are very durational, or holding on to a moment for as long as she can, and you're never bored of it. And I always wondered how she does it. How does she hold our attention for so long in this one specific moment and never be lethargic from the image? And I'm still trying to crack that. Saburo Teshigawara, he's a Japanese choreographer. Again, traditionally ballet trained, but the way he works with choreography and also the use of sonography is a completely balanced piece of work. It's very beautiful the way he works with the set, the lighting, the sound, and and costume, because he actually mostly leads those creative processes himself. So he's designing most of his shows and choreographing it at the same time. So he's another one. Of course, I think everyone would agree. Within the performance world, I think Pina Bausch, that's undeniably I have to mention, because I think she is sort of the pinnacle of all the people that I'm inspired by. So she's like the forefather. Is there such thing as a foremother? I don't know,
Why
but
not?
why not? It should be. You could see how she influenced those artists that influences me, and so there's this beautiful sort of artistic family tree. And that's something, I don't know if I mentioned it to you ever in the past, that I did create sort of like an artistic family tree to sort of discover my forefathers of artistic lineage in some ways. I can send that to you for sure, and you can definitely see how all these different people are interconnected somehow from like few specific figures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting process. It would be interesting for any artist to do. For the time being, let's move on to the second part, which is more specific to the Visionary Rose grant. So, in summary, like this grant aims to support art that resonates far beyond surface aesthetics. And I wanted to ask you what this means when you're evaluating applications.
So, I guess what I'm looking for, I think definitely what I mentioned earlier about that sense of authenticity and vulnerability, but also the level of execution of work. I'm also looking at, I'm also very interested in the process as well, and how this piece of artwork came to be, where it came from. I'm very fascinated by where the origin comes from, where the birthplace is for that specific work. I guess what am I also looking at? I'd say, I think that's about it. I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when reviewing grant applications, what are the key elements or qualities that truly capture your attention and indicate a strong and impactful project? Is there stuff that you're going to see that stands out?
I'd say when they're not waffling, as we call it in British English, as long as, for me, like I prefer things to be straight to the point. This is what it is. This is where it's coming from. This is what it's about. Clear, concise applications. I prefer to read. But also, I'm not really interested in going in too deep into one thing, leading to another. I just like it to be not short, but I think honest, clear, and concise, and it is accessible to read, not just for me, but I think for any readers or for anyone, any other grant applications that they may apply in the future. I think it's important to be clear what you're intending to do and what your intentions are. And yeah, I think that's a very important thing.
Yeah, and you might have responded to the next question with this answer. Is there any common pitfalls or things applicants often miss that you would advise them to pay close attention to in their submission?
Yes, don't think too deeply about the nuances and like the I guess the romanticism of the work and blah blah blah. I think just say it how it is. What do you feel from it? What do you want others to feel from it? and just be, yeah, again, what I said earlier, just be as clear as you can, not for them, but for yourself as well. And I think that's a part of the artistic process, is to write grants or to try and explain it in some sort of analytical way. And because it does help, I think, not all the time, but I think it really does help for you to explain yourself to others as well.
And what do you hope to see the winners of this Visionary Rose Grant achieve with this support? And what kind of impact do you envision their project having?
I hope that they will be proud of themselves first, that they've achieved this, because it's not easy to succeed in getting a grant, because there's so many people applying for it. So it is a process. But also I hope that this gives them a stepping stone to carry on what their creative language is, and being able to translate that to the people, to everyone, as best as they can, but also, yeah, for themselves as well. I think that's the most important thing.
And finally, is there a message you would like to share with the artists that are considering applying for this grant?
I'd say, why the hell not? Like, what have you got to lose? Like, if there's a grant that you can apply to, do it. It would be insane not to.
There you go. Simply, just do it.
Right? Just, if it's there, take it. Take the chance.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what are you working on right now?
Oh my gosh. I'm currently working on my short film with that long title, I Don't Know How to Die, So I May Still Stay Forever. Yeah, I'm still in the writing process. I've done the script, so I'm doing the rewrite of the rewrite at the moment. Because it's quite funny, the first meeting I had with the producers, I sent them just a script as it was, and they were like, "You do realize it's a short film, you've written a feature?" And I was like, "Oh God." So I had to literally destroy it and rebuild it, and just found these very specific scenes that actually communicate better with each other now, funny enough. So I'm really happy about that. So now it's just all the bureaucratic part of the process, the budget, the casting, yeah, all that jazz.
I'm excited to see that, because this grant is going to launch over the summer, so perhaps we might be able to share it on the platforms for people to see it whenever this is out. So
I fucking hope so. Sorry, I should swore. I didn't mean to swear.
Don't worry. Well, thank you so much for taking time for this this short interview. But we've done a longer version of this, so people can go. I'll link it too. So if people want to see the full podcast, and I'm in a more casual context, people can go watch the podcast we filmed together last summer in London.
People have watched it, like so many people that I know have seen it.
Oh yeah.
Like, yeah, I did a theatre show back in May that just finished, and from the first get-go there was people, actors or like other artists coming up to me like, "Dude, I watched your podcast," and I was like, "Oh, thank you so much."
Oh, that's
yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
That's
that was really
pretty good.
nice.
Well, thanks again.